So, I mean, imagine you are trying to return a 60-mile-per-hour projectile, right?
Oh, man. Yeah, that sounds impossible.
Right. And then realizing that your entire ability to actually succeed at doing this comes down to, like, relaxing your shoulder and brushing a piece of rubber at exactly 1 o'clock.
Just incredibly precise.
Exactly. So today, we aren't looking at some polished sports documentary.
No highly curated interviews or slow-motion montages here.
Yeah, nothing like that. Instead, we are looking at something incredibly raw. And honestly, it's pretty intimately revealing.
It really is.
Today's source material for this deep dive is a personal audio journal. It's a voice memo file, plainly titled New Recording 552.MRA.
Just a standard default file name on a phone.
Right. And in this recording, we hear a table tennis player meticulously breaking down a recent practice session. They're, trying to bridge that massive gap between knowing what to do and actually making their body do it.
Yeah, and listening to it, you can almost hear the echo of the empty practice hall in the background. It's this completely unfiltered look at the exact mechanics of physical mastery.
And what makes this audio file so valuable is that it isn't just a table tennis tutorial.
Far from it.
Yeah. Our mission today is to unpack the biomechanics, the underlying physics, and really the sheer power of self-correction that this file reveals. This player is giving us an absolute masterclass in how to deconstruct and perfect a physical skill.
Which is exactly why this matters to you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because, even if you never pick up a ping pong paddle in your life, the methods used in this single audio diary are completely universal.
Definitely.
This player's out there analyzing feedback loops, they're mapping their own body mechanics, and figuring out how to adjust their performance under pressure.
Yeah, which applies to basically anything.
Exactly. Those exact same principles apply to mastering any complex skill you might be tackling. Whether it's, learning a musical instrument, improving your public speaking, or mastering a new software program. It's really all about how we process information, identify our blind spots, and structurally correct our own errors.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how to master a skill, you first have to sort of strip away the pressure.
Right, lower the stakes.
Yeah. The recording starts with the player describing their warm-up routine, just your basic forehand and backhand rallies.
Nothing too crazy.
Right. But by removing the stress of actual competition, they notice a massive breakthrough. They're suddenly able to sustain these incredibly long rallies without getting fatigued.
Wow.
Yeah, and they attribute it directly to proper weight transfer. They describe this really precise feeling of transferring weight from right to left for their forehands, and then from their left hip to their right hip for their backhands. And this shift happens perfectly in sync with the rhythm of the approaching ball.
Well, they are describing the absolute foundation of all athletic movement there. That weight shift, right to left, hip to hip, that is what allows a human body to generate power from the ground up.
Oh, like using your whole body instead of just your arm.
Exactly. Instead of just wildly swinging an arm around, they are using the heavy muscles of the legs and the core to create momentum. But the real revelation in this warm-up session is what they discover about the exact point of contact with the ball itself.
Yeah, the source gets incredibly specific here. The player talks about making contact with the ball to create friction, like a literal brushing effect.
Right.
And they specifically say it's at the 1 o'clock position. So if you imagine the ping pong ball as a tiny clock face looking right at you, they're aiming their paddle to brush right across that upper right quadrant.
Just that specific spot.
Yeah. The source notes that hitting this exact 1 o'clock spot creates an arcing trajectory. It basically ensures the ball reliably clears the net and then drops down exactly onto the target spot they want.
What's fascinating here is the underlying physics they're tapping into.
Yeah.
Because by finding that natural rhythm in their hips and combining it with that very specific 1 o'clock friction point, the player makes a really profound shift.
How so?
Well, they transition away from using brute force to smash the ball over the net. They aren't just hitting it hard anymore. Instead, they're utilizing fluid dynamics. That brushing motion, it creates topspin.
Right, topspin. So the topspin is what forces the ball back down to the table.
Precisely.
I kept trying to picture how this works in the air while I was listening, and it really reminds me of an airplane wing working in reverse.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Because with an airplane, the shape of the wing... right? And that creates lift. But with topspin, the rapid forward rotation of the ball drags air over the top faster than the bottom.
Exactly. And that creates high pressure on top and low pressure underneath. It's called the Magnus effect.
The Magnus effect.
Yeah, it actively pushes the projectile downward. You see it in baseball with a really sharp curveball or, in tennis with a heavy baseline shot.
Right, right.
By trusting that 1 o'clock brush, the player can hit the ball significantly higher. They create this safe, looping arc well above the net, and they don't have to worry about hitting it out of bounds because they know the physics of the spin will violently dip the ball back down onto the table.
It's a lot like the precise way you flick your wrist to skip a stone across the water.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like if you throw a rock flat, it just sinks. You throw it too high, it just plops into the lake.
Yeah.
But if you get that exact precise angle, it skips beautifully.
It's gliding across.
Yeah. Just a millimeter of change in the angle of your hand fundamentally alters the physics of the trajectory.
Yeah.
So that 1 o'clock brushing is basically their stone skipping angle.
That's spot on. They are letting the physics do the heavy lifting, relying on geometry rather than just pure effort.
But, keeping that perfect, beautiful arc during a comfortable warm-up is one thing. Maintaining that exact 1 o'clock technique when the variables change, when the environment turns hostile?
Yeah, that's a whole different story.
Exactly. That is an entirely different beast. And that realization directly leads the player to introduce a new, incredibly rigorous drill.
Right. They have to move from the sterile, safe environment of the warm-up into a simulated high-stress scenario.
Yeah.
And they do this with their training partner, Apichat.
Yeah, so Apichat starts feeding balls with heavy backspin, and backspin is so tricky because it naturally wants to pull the ball straight down to the net the microsecond it touches your paddle.
It just kills the momentum.
Right. So to counter this, the player has to actively try to create a steep upward projectile motion. And to make it even harder on themselves, they place a physical obstacle right on the table that the ball has to clear.
Which is just a brilliant drill. It forces an extreme exaggeration of the brushing technique.
Yeah.
Because you cannot hit through a backspin ball. You literally have to lift it. But the drill itself wasn't the catalyst for the next breakthrough. It was actually how they monitored the drill. Because every single practice session was recorded on video.
Right, the camera's always rolling.
Exactly. And the video revealed a stark reality that the player was completely blind to in the moment. The recording showed that whenever a shot failed, the player's paddle and hand were completely out of position.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The player thought they were dipping their paddle low, but the camera showed their hand just kind of hovering around the edge of the table, or even higher.
They weren't getting under it at all.
No, they were never dropping the paddle below the ball. The video proved that dropping the paddle entirely below the level of the table was the geometric secret to generating that upward net clearing shot.
Now, I have to ask about this. Because we always hear about recording ourselves to improve, right? Athletes do it, public speakers do it.
Sure, it's common advice.
But doesn't overanalyzing video sometimes make people more self-conscious? I mean, if I had a camera watching every single mistake I made at work, I would totally freeze up.
Oh, absolutely. It could be paralyzing.
Right. I'd get so deeply in my own head about my posture or my tone of voice that my actual performance would completely fall apart. How does the source actually use this video feedback without getting paralyzed by their own mistakes?
This raises an important question about how we process feedback, and really the dividing line between constructive analysis and destructive self-criticism.
Yeah.
The key difference here is emotional detachment. If you listen closely to the audio diary, the player never uses the video to judge their self-worth. They aren't throwing their paddle or saying, "Oh, I am terrible at this."
They aren't beating themselves up.
Exactly. They're using the video purely objectively, almost like an aerospace engineer looking at a telemetry readout from a test flight.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, they're just tracking the geometry of their paddle in physical space.
Yeah.
And look at the screen and see, okay, the paddle is at y-axis 10, when the physics of the backspin required to be at y-axis 5.
Just taking the ego completely out of the equation.
Entirely. And it highlights a fascinating flaw in human perception. Our internal proprioception, our sense of where our body is in space, it is notoriously unreliable when we're moving fast or under stress or fighting against deep-seated habits.
Because our brains are just trying to keep up.
Right. Our brains prioritize speed and survival over millimeter-level spatial accuracy. So we rely on how a movement feels rather than objective data. The player felt like they were lowering the paddle to their knees, But the objective data of the camera showed the paddle barely dropping below their waist.
Wow.
They were basically hallucinating their own physical performance.
That is wild. And the camera didn't just expose a bad paddle height. As the audio diary continues, the player reveals that the video exposed a hidden internal barrier that was completely sabotaging their power.
Yeah, which leads right into the concept of kinetic chaining.
The invisible killer of athletic performance,
Yeah.
right? Physical tension.
Exactly.
So the player's watching the playback, and they notice something pretty alarming. Their arm is visibly rigid, it's clenched tight, and the player realizes that because of this extreme tension in their arm, the rotational force they were generating from their torso, that beautiful hip-to-hip weight shift we talked about earlier, it was getting entirely locked at the shoulder.
The energy just had nowhere to go.
Right, it simply stopped. It never transferred down the arm, into the hand, and into the paddle. And the result was this weak, inefficient shot that required the arm muscles to basically do all the heavy lifting on their own.
Which is a catastrophic failure of energy transfer.
Yeah. And here's where it gets really interesting, because thinking about how energy moves through the body like that brought a very specific image to mind. It is exactly like a kink in a garden hose.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you can have massive water pressure coming from the spigot, which, represents the player's torso and hips. The water is rushing up the hose, ready to blast out.
Yeah.
But if there is a sharp kink in the hose, right at the shoulder joint.
It stops right there.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how high you turn up the spigot. The kinetic energy gets trapped at the kink. It never reaches the nozzle. The hand just gets a weak little trickle of power.
That is exactly what is happening. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of biomechanics, we uncover a fundamental paradox of human movement.
That's the paradox.
Yeah, we naturally assume that to hit something hard or to exert a lot of force, we need to flex our muscles. We tend to equate tension with strength.
Right, like gritting your teeth and pushing through it.
Exactly. But in sports, martial arts, or really any physical endeavor requiring explosive power, true power actually comes from relaxation.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive. You have to relax to hit harder.
Mechanically, it is the only way it works. A relaxed shoulder acts as a conduit. It's this open pathway that allows the massive amount of energy generated by the large muscles of the legs and the core to travel seamlessly through the body. It acts like a whip out to the extremities.
Ah, like a whip.
Right. The moment you tense the shoulder, you introduce friction into that kinetic chain. You pinch the garden hose. So the player's effort to hit the ball harder was the exact mechanism sapping their power. The tension acted as a brake on their own momentum.
Okay, but this brings up a massive dilemma. If tension is the enemy of power, and you're in the middle of a fast-paced rally against heavy backspin, how do you ensure you stay relaxed?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because you can't just repeat a calming mantra to yourself while a projectile is flying at your face. You can't think your way out of a physical reaction.
No, the body's moving too fast for conscious thought.
So the source has to figure out a mechanical solution to this mental problem. And what is really wild is that the player realizes the answer to fixing their tense arm isn't found in the arm at all. The answer is entirely in their feet.
Which is the absolute hallmark of advanced problem solving. They aren't just treating the symptom, they are tracing the symptom all the way back to the root cause.
Yeah. The player breaks down their final major lesson in the recording, stating that you absolutely must move your feet before you attempt to hit the ball. Even if the ball is landing incredibly close to where you are already standing, you still have to adjust your stance.
Right, you can't just be lazy and reach for it.
Exactly. Proper footwork is the only thing that allows your torso to twist. If your feet are planted in concrete, your core cannot rotate. And if your core cannot rotate, your brain panics, your arm tenses up, and the shoulder tries to compensate by doing all the work.
It all comes down to establishing optimal geometry before the swing even begins. And this is where the source introduces a spatial concept they refer to as the triangle.
Yeah, the triangle. The way I visualize this based on the source,
Yeah.
if you are setting up for an optimal forehand strike, you cannot just reach your arm out to the side of your body.
No, that breaks the structure.
Right, you have to step and move so that the ball is directly in front of you at the moment of contact. So if you draw a line from your left shoulder out to the ball and your right shoulder out to the ball and then a baseline connecting your two shoulders, it creates a triangle.
And that geometry is what creates the perfect biomechanical striking zone. The body and the ball must be squarely facing each other. By doing that, you're bringing the ball into the absolute center of your structural power.
Yeah, and the player explicitly warns about the danger of letting that geometry collapse. Because if you misjudge the distance or if you are just lazy with your footwork and you let the ball jam you up too close to your body, it destroys the entire sequence.
Totally.
When the ball is too close, your natural physical instinct is to lean backward to create artificial space for your swing.
Which pulls your center of gravity completely off its axis.
Exactly. You lean back, your weight shifts heavily onto your heels, and suddenly you are completely unmoored. And the source makes this crucial point about the compounding nature of this error.
It doesn't just mess up one shot.
Right. Leaning backward doesn't just rob your current shot of its power, it completely ruins your baseline balance for the next movement. You are stuck leaning backward, fighting your own backward momentum, while the ball is already coming back across the net at you. You end up losing precious fractions of a second just trying to return to a neutral stance.
It is a complete domino effect of poor spatial positioning. And when we look at this entire audio journal, we can really synthesize the player's journey into 3 definitive mechanical rules.
Okay, let's hear them.
The source lays out these 3 pillars for hitting a curved, high-friction projectile shot under pressure. Number 1, you must find the exact triangle point with your footwork that maintains your center of gravity and keeps the ball squarely in front of your torso.
Right.
Number 2, you must start your paddle lower than the ball, literally dropping your hand below the level of the table so you can pull up and brush it that 1 o'clock position for maximum arc.
Getting underneath it.
Exactly. And number 3, you absolutely must keep your shoulder relaxed to unkink that hose, allowing the rotational force from your core to flow seamlessly into your hand.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the entirety of New Recording 552.m4a, it is this really profound journey of self-discovery.
It truly is.
We started with the player having a comfortable warm-up, discovering the physics of the 1 o'clock angle and the Magnus effect. Then we moved into the brutal, objective reality of video feedback, where they had to confront the gap between what they felt and what was actually happening.
The telemetry of their mistakes.
Right. From there, we untangled the garden hose of physical tension, discovering how trying too hard actively destroys power. And finally, we arrived at the geometric perfection of the triangle and the absolute necessity of maintaining a grounded center of gravity.
It is quite simply a blueprint for mastery. The intense discipline showcased in this personal audio diary provides a framework for anyone. The willingness to set up a camera and record your flaws. The emotional control to analyze that data objectively. Treating your mistakes as telemetry rather than personal failures.
Taking the ego out of it entirely.
Exactly. The insight to identify a locked shoulder and trace it all the way back to a lazy footwork and a collapsed stance. That process, that continuous cycle of action, objective feedback, non-judgmental analysis, and structural adjustment, that is the definitive method for iterative learning. It's how you incrementally get better at anything in life.
It really makes you look at your own daily routines and struggles differently, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because we saw how the objective lens of the video camera instantly exposed the invisible physical tension that was locking up this player's shoulder and sabotaging their performance. But it makes you wonder, what if we had a video playback for our minds? Right. If you could sit down at the end of the day and watch an entirely objective, emotionless replay of your hardest conversations or your most frustrating hours at work, where would you discover the hidden mental tension that is locking up your own power and throwing off your center of gravity?